The city never truly slept. Even on the coldest, darkest nights, its breath was alive, pulsing with faint lights, distant sirens, and the restless shuffle of those who called its streets home. For Marcus, those streets had become both refuge and prison, a labyrinth where hope and despair intertwined in an endless dance. He sat huddled beneath the stoop of an old brownstone on 45th Street, the worn fabric of his coat doing little to fend off the biting chill. Rain drizzled intermittently, turning the cracked pavement slick and reflecting the neon signs flickering overhead. Around him, the world blurred into a mix of shadows and noise. Car engines growling, the murmur of distant conversations, the occasional bark of a stray dog. Marcus's fingers trembled slightly as he pulled his jacket tighter. He wasn't just cold, the ache in his bones was deeper than weather. It was the ache of loneliness, of forgotten dreams, and the crushing weight of invisible chains forged by years of hardship. Just a decade ago, Marcus's life had been different. There had been a home, a family, a future mapped out in the bright hues of ambition and love. But life has a way of unraveling even the tightest plans. A series of missteps, betrayals, and harsh realities had pushed him from a promising path into the abyss of homelessness. Tonight, like many before, Marcus counted the seconds between raindrops, trying to stave off the creeping numbness. His eyes, dark and thoughtful, scanned the street for something, anything that might break the monotony of survival. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw her. A woman, soaked by the rain, was rushing down the street, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her face was pale, etched with panic and exhaustion. Marcus's instincts sharpened instantly. As she stumbled, the bundle, a baby, let out a sudden piercing cry that cut through the night's stillness. The child's tiny face was flushed red, lips trembling as if struggling for breath. Without hesitation, Marcus pushed himself up, his aching body fueled by an urgency that ignored the cold and fatigue. He stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Let me help." The woman's eyes met his, wide and desperate. She nodded, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. Kneeling carefully, Marcus took the baby in his hands. He checked the tiny throat, felt the faint, rapid pulse beneath his fingers. Then, drawing on a memory from long ago, an emergency class he'd once taken, he began the Heimlich maneuver, precise and practiced. Time seemed to stretch, the world narrowing to the child's struggling breath and Marcus's steady efforts. And then, a gasp. The baby expelled a small piece of food, lodged deep in its throat, coughing violently but finally drawing in a shuddering breath. Relief flooded Marcus as the child's cries softened to a steady whimper. The woman wrapped her arms around the baby, sobbing with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "You saved my baby's life." Marcus nodded, feeling the strange warmth of purpose ignite within him. In that moment, beneath the relentless rain and the flickering streetlight, something shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was seen. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Carter. She explained that she had been fleeing an abusive situation, desperate and alone. The baby, Jacob, was her whole world. Over the next hour, as the rain eased to a drizzle, Evelyn and Marcus talked softly beneath the shelter of the brownstone's awning. She spoke of hope and fear, of starting over, and Marcus shared fragments of his own broken past. When she finally left, Evelyn handed Marcus a small card with her number. "If you ever need help," she said, "call me. No one deserves to be forgotten." As she disappeared into the night, Marcus clutched the card, feeling the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But the city's darkness was never far away, and Marcus knew this night would be the first step on a journey filled with challenges he could not yet imagine. The rain had stopped, but the chill lingered, creeping into Marcus's bones like an unwelcome visitor. He pulled the card from his pocket again, tracing the name Evelyn Carter with his thumb. That small piece of paper felt heavier than it should, a tangible sign of connection in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. Marcus stood slowly, brushing the wet dirt and debris from his coat. The streets around him were quieter now. Few souls remained outside at this late hour. The hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog were the only sounds accompanying his footsteps as he moved away from the brownstone toward a small park where he often slept beneath a cluster of trees. The park was a pocket of stillness within the restless city. Its benches were soaked, leaves slick and glistening under the streetlights. Marcus settled beneath his usual tree, his back pressed against the rough bark. He pulled his coat tighter, closing his eyes for a moment and letting the sounds of the city wash over him. Memories surfaced unbidden. He thought back to a time when his world was brighter, when laughter filled rooms rather than silence, when his future seemed limitless. Marcus had grown up in a small, close-knit neighborhood on the city's outskirts. His parents had worked hard, his mother as a nurse, his father in a factory, and they dreamed of a better life for their son. From an early age, Marcus showed promise in school. His teachers praised his curiosity and determination. Scholarships came, and with them, the hope of college and a career in engineering. But life is rarely a straight path. In his late teens, Marcus's world shifted. His father lost his job during an economic downturn, plunging the family into financial hardship. The strain seeped into the household, fraying nerves and relationships. Marcus took on part-time work, juggling night shifts at a local diner with his studies. Then came the betrayal. A trusted friend, someone Marcus had considered like a brother, stole money from his family, deepening their troubles. The fallout was swift and merciless. Marcus's parents argued constantly, his mother falling into a deep depression. The scholarship that had promised escape was revoked after some administrative mishandling, and the mounting bill swallowed what little hope remained. Soon Marcus found himself on the streets, the weight of failure crushing his spirit. He remembered the nights spent shivering under bridges, the hunger gnawing at his insides, the cold stares of strangers who saw only a homeless man, not the person he once was. But even in the darkest moments, a spark of resilience kept him alive. He learned to survive by his wits, forging connections with others like him, sharing stories and meager resources. Slowly, he found part-time jobs, community shelters, and programs that offered a glimmer of stability. Still, the past haunted him, like a shadow that refused to fade. Now sitting beneath the tree, Marcus allowed himself to hope. Evelyn's kindness was a beacon in the murk, a reminder that even in a city that swallowed dreams, compassion could light the way. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled photograph, a picture of his family taken years ago. He traced the faces, feeling both loss and longing. The path ahead was uncertain, but tonight he had taken a step toward reclaiming his life. The baby's cry echoed softly in his memory, a fragile sound that had stirred something deep inside him. Marcus closed his eyes once more and made a silent vow to protect that light, to fight for a future where no one, not even a stranger on the street, would be invisible. The city around him continued its restless hum, but for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt the stirring of something new. Hope. The dawn crept slowly over the city skyline, casting pale gold light on rain-slicked streets and worn facades. Marcus woke beneath the tree, the damp earth pressing against his back, the faint chill of morning in the air. His body ached in ways both familiar and new, muscles stiff from a restless night, heart heavy with thoughts he couldn't yet untangle. He sat up slowly, brushing the dirt from his coat, and pulled the card Evelyn had given him from his pocket once more. The name Evelyn Carter felt like a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting him to a world beyond the cold indifference of the streets. As Marcus rose, the city around him came alive. Shopkeepers raised metal gates, commuters hurried past, clutching steaming cups of coffee, the faint murmur of conversation filling the early morning air. Yet, amidst the bustle, Marcus felt a quiet distance, a gulf between the life he observed and the one he lived. He made his way toward a small diner not far from the park, a place where he could find shelter and perhaps a cheap meal. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee greeted him as he stepped inside, the warmth a welcome contrast to the crisp air outside. Marcus found a corner booth and settled in, watching the morning crowd with weary eyes. The waitress, a woman with kind smile lines and tired eyes, brought him a cup of black coffee without asking. He took it gratefully, the bitter warmth grounding him. As he sipped, his thoughts drifted back to the night before and the woman who had given him a glimpse of something more, Evelyn. He wondered who she really was beyond the hurried words and anxious eyes. What had driven her to flee into the night with her infant son? Marcus knew all too well the scars left by pain and fear. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different life for them both, one where kindness was abundant and fear was a stranger, but the past wasn't so easily escaped. Later that day, Marcus returned to the community center where he had begun volunteering sporadically. It was a modest building, tucked between a laundromat and a rundown bookstore, but inside it offered warmth, food, and hope to those who needed it most. He arrived just as the afternoon session was starting, greeted by familiar faces and the hum of activity. Evelyn was there, coordinating a group of young mothers with children. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus gave a small nod of acknowledgement. After the session, Evelyn approached him quietly. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. "There's something I need to tell you about why I ran that night." Marcus listened intently as Evelyn shared pieces of her story: an abusive relationship, a desperate escape, and the constant threat that still shadowed her and Jacob. Her voice trembled but held a fierce resolve. "I can't go back," she said. "Not yet, but with your help, maybe one day." Marcus felt the familiar surge of protectiveness rise within him. Despite his own battles, he couldn't turn away from someone fighting for their child's safety. As the weeks passed, their friendship deepened. Marcus found purpose in helping Evelyn navigate the system, finding legal aid, safe housing, and medical care. In return, Evelyn offered support and a connection Marcus hadn't realized he'd been starving for. Yet, even as they built this fragile trust, shadows from Marcus's past lurked nearby. One evening, as Marcus walked home beneath flickering streetlights, a voice called from the darkness. "Marcus." He froze. The name was spoken with a cold familiarity that sent a shiver down his spine. From the shadows stepped a man, tall, lean, with eyes sharp as knives. It was Daniel Cross, the friend who had betrayed Marcus years ago and whose actions had shattered his life. "You didn't think I'd let you disappear that easily, did you?" Daniel's smile was thin and venomous. Marcus's heart pounded. The past he had tried to bury was rising again, threatening to undo everything. The chill of that night clung to Marcus long after Daniel's shadow faded into the darkness. His mind replayed the confrontation relentlessly, each word from Daniel's lips a jagged reminder of wounds he thought had healed. "You didn't think I'd let you disappear that easily, did you?" The phrase echoed over and over, like a taunt from the past he had tried desperately to escape. Marcus knew Daniel's reach was far. For years, Daniel had been a puppeteer in the underground world they had both once been tangled in, an empire built on secrets, betrayal, and ruthless ambition. And Marcus, once close to Daniel, had tried to sever ties, a choice that had cost him everything. Now Daniel had returned, a dark storm on the horizon. The days that followed were tense. Marcus felt eyes watching him in every crowd, heard footsteps lingering just a bit too long behind him. His paranoia, once a shield, was becoming a prison. At the same time, his relationship with Evelyn deepened, a delicate thread of light in the encroaching darkness. They shared whispered conversations about hope, survival, and the possibility of reclaiming stolen lives. One afternoon, as Marcus helped Evelyn move into a new apartment arranged through the community center's housing program, his phone buzzed with an anonymous message: "Stop digging or you'll lose more than you think." A chill ran down his spine. The warning was clear and chilling, yet rather than retreat, Marcus's resolve hardened. He knew he couldn't run forever. With Evelyn's unwavering support, Marcus began to gather the pieces of the puzzle Daniel wanted buried. The truth about corrupt officials, stolen identities, and hidden crimes that tied Daniel's empire to the city's elite. Each step was dangerous, but Marcus understood that exposing the darkness was the only path to freedom. Well, night, as rain hammered against the windows of Evelyn's apartment, Marcus sat at his small desk, poring over files and photographs. Jacob played quietly nearby, a reminder of what was at stake. The phone rang, sharp and sudden. "Marcus," Evelyn answered, her voice trembled. "You need to get out, now." Before Marcus could respond, the line went dead. A heavy silence filled the room. They weren't safe. Outside, the city's shadows were closing in. Marcus barely had time to process the abrupt warning before a heavy pounding at the door shattered the fragile calm. Heart hammering, he exchanged a quick glance with Evelyn, who was clutching little Jacob close. "We have to move, now," she urged, eyes wide with fear. They scrambled to grab what little they could carry. Marcus's mind raced. Where to go? Who to trust? The streets that had once been his refuge now felt like a trap closing in. They slipped out the back door into a maze of alleyways, rain washing over them, mingling with sweat and dread. Marcus's senses were sharp, every shadow a potential threat. The night swallowed them, but their footsteps echoed a defiant rhythm, a promise to survive, to fight. Days blurred into nights as they moved from one safe place to another, relying on a network of trusted allies Marcus had slowly built over the years. Each encounter was a reminder of the fragile thread their lives hung upon. Meanwhile, Marcus dug deeper, uncovering layers of corruption that spread like poison through the city's veins. Daniel's influence reached powerful politicians, law enforcement, and businessmen, people who thrived on fear and silence. But Marcus's exposure was gaining traction. Small victories came, a corrupt officer suspended, a fraudulent contract exposed, and with them, hope. Yet danger followed close behind. One evening, as Marcus returned to a meeting with a key witness, shadows shifted and a cold metal pressed to his temple. Going somewhere, Marcus? Daniel's voice was a venomous whisper. The cold steel against his skin was a brutal reminder of how fragile his new life really was. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he met Daniel's gaze with steady eyes, the years of pain, struggle, and survival sharpening his resolve. You think threats will make me stop? Marcus's voice was low but unwavering. I'm not the scared kid you left behind. Daniel's smirk twisted into something dark. You've always been a fool. This city belongs to me. You're just a ghost trying to haunt the living. The streets around them were empty, but Marcus could feel the weight of unseen eyes. Daniel's men, lurking in the shadows, their presence like a tightening noose. But Marcus had one advantage Daniel didn't expect. Hope. Not for long, Marcus said. Because the truth is coming, and when it does, your empire will crumble. Daniel's laughter was cold, echoing into the night like a curse. Keep dreaming, Marcus. You'll learn soon enough that some debts never die. With a sudden shove, Marcus was pushed into the alley, the gun still pressed firmly against his back. As Daniel's voice faded into the distance, Marcus staggered but didn't fall. His mind raced. He had to protect Evelyn, Jacob, himself. But more than that, he had to finish what he'd started. That night, as the city slept uneasily, Marcus sat alone in a dimly lit room, the weight of his choices pressing down. The past, present, and future collided in a painful symphony. He thought of the little boy's face, Jacob's innocent eyes, and the promise he'd made beneath the rain-soaked night so long ago. This fight wasn't just his. It was for every forgotten soul who had been trampled by the darkness, and Marcus would stand no matter the cost. The sun had just begun its slow climb above the city's jagged skyline when Marcus finally allowed himself a moment of quiet. Storm that had been raging in his mind for weeks seemed to pause, if only briefly. Light poured weakly through the thin curtains of the cramped apartment that Marcus, Evelyn, and little Jacob now called home. It was a far cry from safety, but it was theirs. A fragile sanctuary amid a city shadowed by corruption and fear. Marcus sat near the window, gazing out at the awakening streets below. People bustled about their routines, oblivious to the battles fought in the dark corners of their world. The smell of stale coffee and damp concrete drifted in through the cracked window, mingling with the faint cries of a child. That child was Jacob, cooing softly from his crib nearby, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Evelyn moved about the room, her face etched with exhaustion, but there was a fire burning in her eyes, a stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. She had come a long way from the terrified woman Marcus had met months ago, and their bond had grown deeper with every shared struggle. Marcus reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "We're going to get through this," he whispered, more to convince himself than her. She nodded, squeezing his hand in return. For Jacob, for us. The fight ahead was daunting. Daniel Cross was no ordinary foe. He was a man who thrived on fear and power, weaving a web of influence that touched every corner of the city. But Marcus had allies now, people who believed in justice, in the possibility of change. That morning, Marcus prepared for a meeting with Rosa Martinez, a community organizer whose reputation for fearless activism was well known in the city's underground. Rosa had a sharp mind and an unyielding spirit, qualities Marcus needed as he pushed deeper into exposing Daniel's empire. They met at a small, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of downtown. The air was thick with the scent of roasted beans and whispered conversations. Rosa arrived first, her eyes bright behind thick glasses, a stack of papers, and a laptop already spread out before her. Marcus joined her, and without preamble, they dove into the details. The documents Rosa had gathered painted a damning picture. Fraudulent contracts, bribed officials, and a series of off-the-books transactions linking Daniel's organization to City Hall. "It's all here," Rosa said, tapping a file. But it's not enough. We need witnesses. People willing to risk everything to come forward. Marcus frowned. Most people are scared. Daniel's reach is long, which is why we have to be smart. Rosa replied, we build trust. Protect those who speak out. We chip away at the system, one piece at a time. Their plan took shape over hours of discussion, fueled by determination and an unspoken urgency. They would work through trusted community networks, reach out to victims, and gather as much evidence as possible. Back at the apartment, Marcus spent evenings coordinating efforts, fielding calls, and reviewing reports. Evelyn handled much of the day-to-day care for Jacob, but she also became a vital part of the movement, connecting with other mothers, sharing stories, building solidarity. Each day brought small victories. An incriminating email uncovered, a corrupt officer suspended, a hesitant witness agreeing to talk. The momentum was slow but steady, but with progress came danger. One night, as Marcus returned from a meeting, he found a note slipped under their door. You're closer than you think. Stop now or lose everything. Marcus stared at the crude handwriting, the threat igniting a cold fire within him. Crushing. The paper, he vowed to press on. That week, the city seemed to hold its breath. Marcus and Rosa worked tirelessly, arranging secret meetings and coordinating with legal aid groups. Evelyn's courage inspired those around her, her story a beacon for others trapped in similar circumstances. Despite the constant threat, hope blossomed in small ways. A stolen moment of laughter from Jacob, a community rally gathering more. Support than expected, a whispered thank you from a survivor finding her voice. Yet the shadows remained. Surveillance, mysterious phone calls, and the ever-present feeling of being watched tested Marcus's resolve. One evening, as rain pelted the windows, Marcus and Evelyn sat together, Jacob asleep in her arms. We're not alone in this, Marcus said softly. People are ready to fight back. Evelyn nodded. We have to believe that, for Jacob's sake. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and sacrifice. But in the flickering light of their shared determination, Marcus found strength. They would face the darkness, not as victims, but as warriors for justice. And no matter what came, they would not back down. The city's heartbeat pulsed with an uneasy rhythm, its streets a labyrinth of secrets and danger. Marcus could feel the weight of his choices pressing on him like never before. A crossroads where every decision carried consequences far beyond himself. It was early spring now. The air held a faint promise of renewal, but for Marcus and Evelyn, the battle was far from over. Their lives intertwined with a growing movement against the corrupt forces that sought to silence them. The apartment where they lived was small, but filled with determination. Jacob's laughter often pierced the tension, a reminder of what was at stake. Yet Marcus knew that Daniel's grip was tightening. The warnings had become more direct, more menacing. Marcus sat at the worn kitchen table, papers spread before him, reports, maps, contact lists. Rosa's calls came frequently, each bringing news of new allies or fresh dangers. We have a lead, Rosa said over the phone, her voice steady but urgent. A former enforcer from Daniel's crew wants to talk. He has information that could bring everything crashing down. Marcus's pulse quickened. This was the break they'd been waiting for, but also a dangerous gamble. We'll need to protect him, Marcus said firmly. If Daniel finds out, he won't, Rosa promised. We're setting up safe houses, witnesses protection. This time we do it right. Arranging the meeting was a delicate dance. Marcus felt the familiar sting of paranoia, but also the thrill of hope. If this man truly had the evidence, it could change everything. The day of the meeting arrived on a gray, overcast afternoon. Marcus and Rosa met the informant in a secluded park, shadows falling long between twisted trees and empty benches. The man was older than Marcus expected, grizzled, with tired eyes that held the weight of regret. He introduced himself as Simon, a man who had once been part of Daniel's inner circle but had grown disillusioned. I've seen things, Simon said quietly. Things no one should have to live with. Daniel's crimes go deeper than you realize. Money laundering, bribery, even worse. I'm done running. Simon handed over documents, audio recordings, and detailed accounts of illegal dealings. Marcus listened. Pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The web of corruption was vast and suffocating, but Simon's presence put them all in danger. That night, Marcus and Evelyn fortified the apartment, fear gnawing at their edges. Then, the unthinkable happened. A violent knock shattered the fragile peace. Marcus opened the door to find a group of men, Daniel's enforcers. A tense standoff ensued, with Marcus and Rosa managing to delay them just long enough for Simon to slip away through a back window. The men left, warning Marcus that the next time, they wouldn't be so forgiving. Breathing hard, Marcus realized the fight was no longer just about survival. It was a war. In the days that followed, Marcus's network mobilized. Safe houses were secured, legal teams readied. The city's underbelly began to stir with the promise of reckoning, yet amid the chaos, Marcus found solace in small moments. Evelyn's smile, Jacob's growing curiosity, the strength of newfound friendships. At a community rally organized by Rosa, voices rose in defiance, demanding justice and transparency. Marcus stood among them, heart pounding, knowing that the crossroads of destiny were upon them all. Their path was fraught with peril, but the flicker of light that had begun to shine promised a future worth fighting for. And Marcus was ready to walk that path, no matter the cost. The pressure was mounting. Marcus felt it in every fiber of his being, the relentless push and pull between hope and despair, between the courage to stand tall and the temptation to give in to the shadows. Daniel Cross was no longer just a distant threat, he was an immediate danger, his influence closing in like a tightening noose. The city that once felt like a sprawling maze was shrinking around Marcus, Evelyn, and little Jacob. The nights were the hardest. The silence was never complete. Footsteps lingered outside, whispers floated through cracked walls, and the ever-present fear clung to their skin like a second shadow. Despite the danger, Marcus's resolve burned brighter than ever. With Simon's testimonies and evidence in hand, their movement had gained traction. News outlets began to hint at corruption scandals, and public pressure swelled like a rising tide. But the cost was high. One evening, after a long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Marcus returned home to find Evelyn shaken, her hands trembling as she held Jacob close. "They came while you were gone," she whispered. They searched the apartment, took some things. Marcus's stomach tightened. The sanctity of their refuge was shattered. "We have to move," he said firmly, masking the fear beneath a veneer of strength. They packed what they could carry, slipping into the night with heavy hearts but fierce determination. Their new safe house was a modest apartment in a quieter part of town, but the sense of vulnerability remained. Days later, Marcus met with Rosa and Simon to plan the next phase, going public with the evidence, exposing Daniel and his network once and for all. "It's risky," Rosa cautioned, "but this is our moment." As the media began to cover the story, the city's power started to react. Daniel's allies pushed back fiercely. Threats, smear campaigns, and attempts to discredit witnesses. Marcus watched as people he trusted were intimidated, some forced into silence. The breaking point came one rainy night when Marcus received a call that shattered his world. Evelyn had been attacked. Rushing to the hospital, Marcus found her battered but alive, holding Jacob tightly. Tears mixed with rain as Marcus vowed silently to protect them at all costs. This moment was a crucible, forging Marcus into something stronger, fiercer. The fight was no longer just about justice. It was about survival, about family. With renewed determination, Marcus and his allies prepared for the ultimate confrontation, knowing that the shadows were closing in, but that the light they had kindled could not be extinguished. The city seemed to hold its breath as Marcus, Evelyn, and their growing circle braced for what felt like the inevitable storm. The attack on Evelyn was a brutal reminder of the stakes. They were no longer merely fighting a corrupt system. They were fighting for their lives. Marcus sat in the dim light of the hospital room, watching Evelyn sleep, her face bruised but resilient. Jacob, nestled safely in her arms, was a small island of innocence in a sea of chaos. Outside, the world was changing. The news had broken wide open. Daniel Cross's empire was unraveling. Reports flooded the airwaves. Headlines screamed of scandal, betrayal, and corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. Public outrage surged, rallies erupted in the streets, and law enforcement agencies, previously silent or complicit, found themselves under intense scrutiny. But with the rising tide of justice came the swelling force of desperation from those who had everything to lose. Daniel's men lurked in the shadows, planning their next move. Marcus refused to be intimidated. He met with Rosa and Simon in a safe house nestled deep within the city's labyrinthine backstreets. "We have to be ready for anything," Rosa said, her eyes sharp and determined. Simon nodded, his weary face betraying the weight of what he knew. They won't go down without a fight. Plans were drawn, alliances forged, and contingency measures set in motion. Meanwhile, Marcus worked tirelessly to protect witnesses, secure legal protection, and prepare the public for the revelations yet to come. But even as the movement gained momentum, the personal toll was immense. Sleep was a scarce commodity. Every phone call, every unexpected knock sent adrenaline surging through Marcus's veins. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Marcus found himself standing alone on a rooftop overlooking the city lights flickering. Through the rain, the storm mirrored the turmoil inside him, fierce, relentless, and unyielding. He thought of Evelyn and Jacob, of the countless others depending on him, and steeled himself. The rising storm was not just outside, it was within, and Marcus was ready to face it head on. The walls that Daniel Cross had built around his empire began to crack, one by one, under the relentless pressure of truth and courage. The city, once paralyzed by fear and silence, stirred with newfound strength. Marcus felt the shift keenly, like the first tremors before an earthquake. The evidence gathered by Simon and the brave testimonies Rosa helped collect had shaken the foundations of corruption. But Daniel was desperate, and desperation breeds chaos. In the weeks that followed, whispers of betrayal spread through Daniel's ranks. Some loyalists began to question their allegiance, while others doubled down, desperate to cling to power. Marcus's network moved carefully, exploiting every fissure. At a pivotal meeting held in a concealed warehouse, Marcus and Rosa strategized the final steps of their campaign. "We expose everything. Names, dates, accounts," Rosa said. "We leave no room for doubt." Marcus nodded. "We need the public on our side when it goes down. The more eyes, the safer our witnesses." The media blitz was planned meticulously. Legal teams prepared for inevitable counterattacks, but Daniel was not idle. One night, as Marcus reviewed files late into the evening, a power outage plunged the apartment into darkness. His phone buzzed, a cryptic message: "You're running out of time." His heart pounded. Moments later, a crash echoed from the other room. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and edged forward cautiously. Shards of glass sparkled on the floor. The front window had been smashed. Someone had been inside. Fear and fury warred within him, but Marcus knew retreat was not an option. With renewed resolve, he rallied the team. The unraveling had begun, and soon the city would see the truth. The city was electric with anticipation, the air thick with the sense that something monumental was about to happen. The reckoning, long whispered about in hushed tones, was finally within reach. Marcus stood before a sea of faces at the City Hall Plaza. A crowd gathered not just to witness, but to participate in the unveiling of long-buried truths. Cameras flashed, reporters called out questions, and a palpable energy surged through the throng. Behind the scenes, legal teams moved swiftly, filing charges against Daniel Cross and his closest associates. The evidence was overwhelming, a fortress built. From months of relentless investigation, Marcus's heart pounded with a mix of triumph and dread. This was what they had fought for, but victory always came with a price. That night, as Marcus and Evelyn watched Jacob sleep, a sudden knock shattered the fragile peace. It was Simon, breathless and wide-eyed. "They're not going down without a fight," he warned. "Daniel's making his final moves. Be careful." True to his word, Daniel unleashed chaos. Bribed officials tried to sabotage investigations. Media outlets planted false stories, and enforcers threatened key witnesses. Marcus found himself at the center of a storm, but he stood firm, bolstered by the community that had rallied behind him. One evening, surrounded by allies, Marcus received the news. Daniel Cross had been arrested. Cheers erupted, tears flowed, but Marcus remained cautious. Justice was never simple. The reckoning was not. An end, but a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to heal, and to fight for a better future. Marcus looked at Evelyn and Jacob, hope shining in his eyes. They had survived the darkness. Now they would embrace the light. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the curtains, casting a gentle glow over the small apartment where Marcus, Evelyn, and Jacob were beginning a new chapter of their lives. The battles they had fought, the dangers they had faced were still fresh in their minds, but so too was the promise of peace. Hard won and deeply cherished. With Daniel Cross behind bars and his corrupt network dismantled, the city slowly began to heal. Streets once shadowed by fear were now filled with voices demanding fairness and justice. Community centers flourished, and neighbors who had once lived in silence now shared stories of resilience and hope. Marcus found himself stepping into new roles, a leader not just in the fight against corruption, but as a beacon of strength for those around him. Rosa continued her tireless activism, and Simon, having faced his past, worked to rebuild his life with dignity. For Marcus and Evelyn, every day brought small victories. A smile from Jacob learning to walk, the warmth of a shared meal, the quiet moments where laughter replaced fear. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through a bustling park filled with children's laughter, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The kindness of a stranger, the courage of a community, and the unbreakable bonds of family had carried them through the darkest nights. Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. "We made it," she said softly. Marcus smiled, eyes shining with gratitude. "We did, and this is just the beginning." Together, they looked ahead to a future filled with possibility, where light could flourish even after the longest shadows. The story of the kind stranger who saved a life and the woman who refused to give up was now woven into the fabric of the city's history, a testament to the power of hope, courage, and love. And as Jacob took his first confident steps, the world around them seemed to hold its breath once more, in awe of new beginnings.